Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. This is episode 352. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from the USA Today NFL Wire. And my co-host tonight, recording on a Tuesday night, as is almost always the case, is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation's family of sites, and also the host of the original NFL Draft Breakdown podcast, which he hosts with Justin Higdon, a guy that we've had on our show a couple of times in the last month. If you have not gotten on that show yet, it definitely is time to listen to it, because it is draft season, and that's what we're going to talk about in this show, Seth. We've got the offensive draft preview that we're going to talk about, and in particular, we've got wide receivers to talk about. We've got running backs and offensive linemen, and then we'll talk a little bit about the tight ends and the quarterbacks. The quarterbacks will be more in general thing because the Cardinals. If there's four positions, I think I can eliminate for the first round. Okay, we know they're not going to draft a quarterback unless things go really south really fast, and that which is both. So we're not gonna go the nuclear option. We're gonna say they're not drafting a cornerback. They're not drafting a safety, considering who they have at safety. Because of the contract to James Conner, I'm almost certain that they won't draft a running back in round one. And for the love of God, please don't draft another inside linebacker. Please.
I think you can even take tight end off that list now.
That is true. Plus, the tight end class is...
Yeah, you probably tight end and linebacker probably don't have... tight end and running back, probably don't have guys that fit that first-round mold. But yeah, I mean, when you look at it, it's really limited to, unfortunately for fans, the wide receiver position. The offensive line, because it's a year that we have an NFL draft, so you can always draft offensive linemen. Same thing goes with corner. Cornerbacks always can be drafted in the first round. Doesn't matter if you draft one every year. Like, literally, you can draft one every year. But it's an actual need for the Cardinals, too. And then you look at the edge and defensive line positions for the team. And so those are really the, key positions that they need to address, which makes it interesting because, there are a number of positions that we'll go over the next 2 weeks that they can address, and there's a number of ways they can go about it, and there's talent at every round. The Cardinals at this point don't have a 4th or 5th round pick, which, I mean, I guess if you don't want to get up early on Saturday of the draft, that makes things good for you. But at the same time, it also means that Jess and I don't get done until about 2:30, 3 o'clock on Saturday.
I don't know why. Like, what? Don't, please trade those picks, especially if they don't have a 4th or 5th round. But that's a me problem. That's not a you problem. We get excited about 6th and 7th round picks, and I will say this: talking to the 6th and 7th round draft picks is a treat. You get things like Michael Dogme's story when he was crying. You get Benjamin getting drafted by his local team. It's good stuff. But this edition of the show, and because of the way this draft is set up, we do have positions and significant players to talk about on both sides of the ball. So in this show, we're going to focus on the offensive side, where we lead with wide receivers, move to offensive line, then to running back, and then tight end and quarterback in. I think the wide receiver position has been made the focus of all the attention on social media, for the simple fact that the Cardinals have done absolutely zero at the wide receiver position. They have hosted a kid named Malik Turner. Okay? He plays special teams. He had 12 catches last year. Christian Kirk signed a ginormous contract with Jacksonville. AJ Green is unsigned. Now, if I were to predict how things are going to play out between now and the regular season, I would expect the Cardinals. So if I know we want to see these first round receivers, that might still happen, but you're going to get AJ Green and you're going to like it, is probably what's going to happen. I'm preparing myself for this and I'm preparing everyone else. You're going to get AJ Green and you're going to like it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, you look at it, they're just not in a position at 23 to dictate if they can sit and wait.
Yeah,
right?
Well, and at the 23rd pick, and the people are saying it's like, it's impossible to zero in on a player at number 23. You can't.
Right. Well, and honestly, it's even impossible, and we're going to go through it in a second, but it's even impossible to narrow in on a position, because you can say, like, hey, if one of these 5 receivers are there at 23, well, we're going to take one. And then all 5 of them are gone. So then you're like, well, not going to take a wide receiver at 23. So that's the hard thing, is like, and 5 might be exaggerating, but you just look at it from that perspective. That's how it kind of works, right? So
yeah,
when you're not drafting, and let's be honest, we're just not used to this, drafting in the 20s. What's going on?
It's not bad. It's not exciting, but it's also not bad. But let's start with the receivers. And as we go through, what we're going to focus on is we'll talk about top end prospects that could be in the mix for the first round, then more day 2, and then probably like the late, because since the Cardinals, unless something happens, they're not going to have a 4th or 5th round pick, but they will be super active with 5 picks in the final 2 rounds. So these are going to be guys with flaws but special traits. But let's talk receiver, because there are some really, really good wins, and it's happening now because of the focus in the passing game, is that every year you're getting really what seems to be a good receiver class almost every single year. And this year in particular, they're expected to come off the board quickly. There are the ones at the top. So you've got, unfortunately, got the ACL tear, Jameson Williams. You've got Drake London out of USC. You've got the 2 Ohio State kids, Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. You've got Arkansas's Traylon Burks. And then you've got, you have a few other players that, whether it's 5 or 6, you could see as many as 6, maybe even 7 receivers go in the first round. But 5 are kind of the guys I want to focus on right first. And this is information that I've gotten on Tuesday. Is what I have heard is that, if the Cardinals had their choice of receivers, it would be Jameson Williams. The problem is, and I wondered about where he would land, considering coming off the ACL tear, wondering if he would fall out of the first round. Based on what I heard from someone who heard something, it tells me he's not going to be off. He's not going to make it out of the top 15. Even with the ACL tear, he's that good. People consider him he could be an elite receiver with his size, with his speed, especially with that speed.
Yeah, and you just look at it. I mean, Williams is a guy that's going to go probably in the top. I would say his floor, meaning the lowest we'll see him go, is probably 22, right before the Cardinals, and
that's
that would be
low, and
that would be like best case scenario where he ends up. A lot of people,
and everyone gets excited, and I know, and I have with my son and a group of young people in their early 20s, college age kids, who are very excited about Jameson Williams and would love for him to be the pick. If he makes it all the way to number 22, that would be, and then the Packers pick him, would be tragic.
It would be. So then you look at Williams. It's one of those things. People have been asking me, like, what have you heard? What have you heard? Like, who do they like? And so, like, there's 2 guys that I don't even mention, and it's just because I don't see either of them being there. And quite honestly, 3 of the guys I don't even talk about. So you mentioned Jamison Williams. The next guy, kind of consensus number 2 on the board, or one of the top guys, is Garrett Wilson out of Ohio State. Um, Again, almost a consensus that it's not going to be a choice for the Cardinals. So again, we talk about like they could love these guys. I've heard that
And it won't matter.
yeah, I've heard actually that they love both Ohio State wide receivers. So that would, but Wilson's a guy that's probably going to go a little earlier. Um, he's a different type of receiver than like a Jamison Williams. Jamison Williams is a freak speed guy, sub 4.3 guy before the ACL tear at over 6'1". Wilson is a sub 4.4 guy, really plays like a 4.4 guy, but he's a very physical, kind of in your face receiver. Just a different type of guy. The next guy that again, I don't even mention it, is Drake London out of USC.
He would be a perfect fit, and if you've been paying attention to the show, Drake London, we've said, would be a perfect fit for what the Cardinals need in terms of size and skill set. But, yeah, the only doubt, like, people say he doesn't necessarily, that he might not get the separation in the pros. He's faster than people think, isn't he?
He is, and the other thing is, you look at him, he's already a guy that makes contested catches easily. And the reason why is because he is such a big target. It's very odd to see a guy that's over 6'2", and in Drake's case 6'4". He's 220 pounds. He's got 33-inch arms. So you're talking about a guy that's built more like a shooting guard, or even some small forwards rather than a wide receiver. Because remember, wide receivers are typically a big wide receiver is considered 6'1". So you're talking about 6'4", kind of on the Mike Evans spectrum in terms of size and usage type of thing. That's why we say it would be ideal. You look at how they used AJ Green last year. Now add in a guy that's an inch taller and 14 years younger, 13 years younger. So, not to say he would be that, but he could be akin to a prime AJ Green or a prime Mike Evans. And then on the low end, maybe he's just similar, a slightly more athletic 4-year-old AJ Green. So you're talking about a guy that has 60 catches for 900 yards,
or
and
a consistent
touchdowns.
Michael Floyd.
Right. So somebody like that. So
Michael Floyd without the drinking problems.
Right. And so that would be obviously ideal. So those are the guys at they can love them all they want. It's not an option, probably. I mean, never.
Right.
When you say never say never, I mean, obviously never say never. But
it just feels like as we get closer to the draft that they're not going to be options. Like,
right.
and from what I saw someone say that Gambo said it to John Gambadoro here, local Arizona Sports 98.7, said that the Cardinals won't trade up to get a receiver, which is probably smart, considering the value of the position. I mean,
right.
Receivers are important, but you don't want to give up draft capital to do it.
Right. And again, never say never. Don't say like, oh, they wouldn't give up anything. But like when you look at it and you say, if Jamison Williams falls to 21, maybe they go up and swap, first round picks and then give up a fourth next year for to go get Jamison Williams, right? Like you could see that, but like what we know more than anything about Keim is what he doesn't want to give up future first round picks. So what we're saying is don't expect him to trade up to 8 with the Atlanta Falcons and give up 23 and 87 and then give up next year's first, because that's about what it would cost. So now you look at the next two guys that are on the consensus, and again, we're just going over the consensus. We're not necessarily ranking ours or anything like that, but you've got two names that continually come up that we've seen in a lot of mock drafts, right? Treylon Burks from Arkansas and the other Ohio State guy, Chris Olave. Burks is an interesting guy because he's built exactly what the Cardinals need, right? 6'2", 225 pound big body wide receiver.
And can go up and get the ball. Like, he can. That's the thing, that he can make those contested catches. But
it's just not something he's asked to do a lot.
Right.
You look at what he's done. 75, I think it's actually 73, so don't quote me, but we'll just say 75% of his routes and catches come from the slot. So you're again becoming redundant at that position with Rondale Moore, who you're probably not going to move to that Z receiver, right? And then you have your big slot mismatch in Zach Ertz when you flex and go into, quote unquote 10 personnel, and you don't need to bring another wide receiver on because you have Zach Ertz. That's what you're paying him that money for. Burks is a guy that you manufacture touches for as well. So he's a guy that you do a lot of, short stuff, basically how they used Rondale Moore, with the ability to do a little more down the field because in contested settings because of his size, like we said, at 6'2", 225. I just don't.
Like, he could be, and that's the thing, is that you look at the body type and you say, okay, we believe, like, we've seen enough unlimited work that he can do that, and that's possibly the case. However, this is the Cardinals and their projections for players. When they drafted Andy Isabella, they projected him to be
a slot
guy. He's not that. He wasn't that in college. He hasn't done it well in the pros, and so you'd be taking a guy like Burke. Now, he's built the part, and there's no. He definitely could do it, but if you're looking for a first round receiver, and yes, he is fast enough. Of course, you have the clip of him, going 22 miles an hour on the GPS, and you see him run by players. But when you look at athletic testing, he's fairly unremarkable. He's not unathletic, and he's not elite athletic, but he's unremarkable considering the receiver position. What he had was a 32-inch vertical, 33, which is okay. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that.
No.
And 4.55 isn't slow. No, but he's not a burner. And so he becomes an unremarkable prospect to play outside unless you see something in his work ethic and in the limited work that says, yes, he could be that outside guy. And maybe that's kind of worth it, where you do get him, but you still sign an AJ Green, and Burks works his way into that in a year. Is that exactly what you want to do? I don't know.
Right, and so it'd be similar to what they did with Rondale Moore. It'd be kind of similar to what they did with Evan Collins, and so we know how much that upsets people. The last guy that gets a lot of pub in the first round is obviously Chris Olave. So when you look at Olave, the comps for him come out in a different, a good range of players. We've seen a lot of Will Fuller. Which I don't think is a bad comp at all. If he can stay healthy, remember Fuller was a guy that was putting up over 1,000 yards a season when he's healthy. The problem with Fuller, he's just never been healthy. So, you look at it from that perspective, to where like your low end, and Cardinals fans will remember this, is like a Stevie Breston. So again, a really good wide receiver, a guy that was successful in the league for a long time. Maybe he's not a true number one, but he's a guy that can be a really, really good 2 or a great number 3. I look at Olave and I see a guy that's similar to like the Washington Commanders, Terry McLaurin type. Like that's
and he's good. And those Ohio State receivers, they produce.
They do. They come in and they play well. And he would be a guy that would open up the offense a little bit because of his speed. So now all of a sudden you've got 2 guys in Olave and Moore that have, take the top off the defense speed. But Olave has done that a lot at Ohio State. So he's already run those routes more consistently than what Moore was doing at Purdue, and then obviously in year 1 in Arizona. So those are, kind of the day one guys. So, you look at it, and then there's a couple fringe day 1, but more likely day 2 guys. Jahan Dotson, again, a guy that I like. The question with Dotson is size. He's So, Olave's 6 foot and 187 pounds, and people have a question about his size. Uh, Jahan Dotson's 5'11 and 178. So, like, you're talking about probably a slot only guy coming out. Um, Again, redundant. That's the problem. So, I don't see that being the best fit for the Cardinals. A guy that a lot of people are high on. I've got red flags in a lot of spots is Christian Watson out of North Dakota State. Um,
Oh, the athletics, like the physical profile and the speed and the size. What he's like Calvin Johnson athletic,
yeah,
but
at 6'4", in an eighth, he's in the 94th percentile for height, meaning, there's not that many guys. He is very thin, 208 pounds, super, super thin. But you look at his 10-yard splits in the 97th percentile, his vertical jumps in the 84th, his broad jumps in the 98th. Like, this dude is a freak. And then he ran a 4.36.
but he played. But they had him and they had Trey Lance, and then they didn't throw the ball down the field. And you're gonna and he might be great, but he won't be great. He won't be super productive great as a rookie. He won't.
No, and that's the problem is he's being pushed into the first round, right? And so you're looking at it going, I don't know. And so there's a couple red flag names that come up right away. Stephen Hill being one of them. Similar size, speed, profile. When you talk about it, remember Stephen Hill was the Georgia Tech wide receiver who was 6'4", about 215 pounds, ran a 4.34 40. Great vertical, all that stuff. And then, but he was from Georgia Tech. They're in triple option. And so, like, you're having to teach him from scratch, how to play a wide receiver. So that's my concern with Watson. So when I say things like you have to look at the cost analysis of it, that's what I'm talking about with him. You're talking about a guy that, while he put up good numbers, 43 receptions, 801 yards, 7 touchdowns this year, is he a guy that should be a first round pick? I think, honestly, if you could get him at 87, it's a slam dunk. That's a great pickup. 55, I'm hesitant still. 23, I'm completely out. There's no desire for that. And I may be wrong. I may be 100% wrong. And I'll come on here and be like, oh, man, I was really wrong on that guy. But just based on what we've seen, I don't think it's the juice is worth the squeeze, especially at that moment.
Some receivers that are like, if the Cardinals didn't go receiver in the first round, there are some intriguing names for the 55th pick. Although this question is whether they're going to be around. I know you were a big fan of George Pickens out of Georgia. Another name that I like, but also you also like. The kid out of Cincinnati, Alex Pierce.
Alex Pierce, yeah.
Pierce and Pickens would both be fantastic picks at 55. The problem is, do they make it there? And on your show, you've even said that if it came down to it, you'd actually be fairly comfortable. Like, all things considered, if you're dead set on a receiver, you're even okay with Pickens in round 1.
Yeah, if you're like, hey, we got to get a guy. He fits what they need. He's that outside Z opposite, that AJ Green role. That's how he was used at Georgia as a big, as a big kind of downfield target for Stetson Bennett, excuse me. Size 6'3", 195, little thin, which is, always concerning. But I mean, he's a guy that 2 years ago, everybody kind of expected him to be a top 5 player in this draft, right? And then the year off, not the year off, but the COVID year where everybody, you kind of were like, on everybody, and then This year, he blows out his knee in spring ball, so you're like, oh, well, this guy's done. And then he comes back and plays in the national championship game. And
Which, in terms of value for the Cardinals, if you looked at the players that they took last year, James Wiggins, Marco Wilson, guys who suffered severe knee injuries, but came back and played at a high level, and then tested freakishly well.
yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, he tested and he ran a 4.47, and everybody was like, oh, that was way better than I expected. Um, and so when you look at just his size and his usage, he's a guy that fits what they want to do. He's already been used in that way, so and he'd be a big target. Ideally, if you got him at 55, it would be a home run type of pick. And then the other guy you mentioned was Alec Pierce. Pierce is one of those ones again. You're in the day two range, but you're talking about a guy that if Christian Watson wasn't at the combine, the guy that everybody would be talking about is Alec Pierce.
Over 6'3", 4'1".
40 and a half. Now, we knew he was going to jump out of the gym because he is like an elite level volleyball player too. So like that was not a shock. But so, I mean, you look at it, he's a guy in the like DJ Chark, somebody we talked about, right? DJ
Yes.
Chark.
And the Cardinals didn't want to pay him 1 year, $10 million.
Yeah, so like you look at it, he's in that DJ Chark, maybe like a Donovan People-Jones range, in terms of talent. That's kind of what the Cardinals need, right? Like everybody's looking at it and goes, "Oh, they just they need a dog." Well, yeah, but like they also need
You can always use speed, and guess what? Cliff Kingsbury loves speed.
Yeah, and you can always use size that allows for those back shoulder throws, for those contested catches, something that Kyler Murray does an excellent job of. So those are the day two guys. There's other names that we didn't mention. Sky Moore, out of Western Michigan. He's probably going to end up getting drafted in that 30 to 50 or 30 to 60 range. I know it's a big range, but again, you're talking maybe a slot only type of guy. He tested out really, really well. You look at who else is there? We mentioned Jahan Dotson, Jalen Tolbert. He's one of the guys that we've talked about where they get screwed by their school, because you look at all of his measurements and you're like, oh, this dude's a 6'3", 210-pound wide receiver, and he looks like a 4.5 guy. And so you're like, oh, that's this is a good looking dude. And then he measures in and he's 6'1" and 195 pounds, and so then he's still a 4.5 guy, but you're like, well, 6'1", 195, like that's
it's ordinary.
Yeah, that's what you're expected to do. The difference between like a Tolbert and a Christian Watson for me is that Tolbert absolutely dominated where he played for 3 years. So he put up a ton of numbers. And so that's a big thing when you look at it. Tolbert's a guy like at 87, if he was there, I could see him being a fit. Even though he only measured at 6'1", 195, I think he could be a guy kind of like a Marvin Jones type of guy in the NFL that's carved out a 25-year career. It seems like.
Feels like. I've got a question on another Alabama guy, John Mechie. I don't know much about him, but I've read a little bit. Is perhaps to take an example from this? Remember back in the Kenyon Drake year, he didn't get many touches, but he ended up being a guy that people kind of liked, and he's now carved out a very nice career. But because of being behind the running back that he didn't get the touches. And John Mechie playing behind, Jameson Williams, is there anything there with Mechie?
Yeah, we also got to remember he tore his ACL in, I think, December it was. Um, the only issue I think with Mechie is he's kind of like those other guys that we just kind of mentioned, like Sky Moore and Jahan Dotson, 5'11", 180-ish, 185. And he's a guy, phenomenal route runner already, but he's a guy that's probably going to be a slot guy in the NFL, and so that's where you wonder if he can fit at that Z position. Because while he's a good athlete, he's not a guy that's going to win contested catches. He's not a guy that's going to, take the top off a defense with his speed. So that's uh, those are the questions. Um, he's great short. He's not quite Tyler Lockett, obviously, but he's in that kind of mold. So that would be my hesitation with like a Mechie, is that's just kind of what you're looking at as a guy that probably isn't going to end up being a true outside guy like the Cardinals need.
So, are there any other players and any names to kind of throw out there for day three? When I look at some mock draft simulations, a name that comes up for me a few times is Michigan State's Jalen Naylor. You've got some burner guys at the back end where you can usually find, what was it, Tyquan Thornton out of Baylor. It seems like Baylor always has the fastest receivers. Any other day three guys that would be worth a look, who could have any day three guy? We're never going to expect them to be, but that could be big game producers from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the names you mentioned, Tyquan Thornton, 6'2", very lean at 180, but ran a 4.28. So, he's a guy that can absolutely fly. Not overly surprising, but he's very linear, meaning he's a guy that's going to, run kind of deep routes. He'll be, 6th-round pick probably. You look at like a Romeo Dobbs out of Nevada is a really interesting name. Dobbs measured in at 6'2", 200 pounds. Um, I don't think we have testing numbers on him, so I don't think he did any workouts. But you look at him, he's been a jump ball guy for Carson Strong out in Nevada, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, and he's a guy that's got, good good size to be able to go up and get those contested jump balls, but he's really just kind of a down the field attack type of guy. I like him. Like, he would be the ideal 4th-round pick if they had a 4th-round pick. Obviously, that's what makes that a little tougher. And then there's one other guy I wanted to mention. I can't remember his name. Where was he? Sorry, I'm clicking through my notes here. Ty Freifogel out of Indy. He didn't test extremely well at 4.53, but he's again a 6'1", 205-pound guy. He, I believe, was he was like one of the better wide receivers, second team all conference in 2020 at Indiana. So it's not like they're a powerhouse. He's a 4.53 guy, but great vertical ability, 39-inch vertical. He's a guy that he is a kind of that get outside and out jump you type of guy. He's never going to run past you, but he has that ability to break off routes and come back to the ball. So he's an interesting round 6 type of guy. I'm not saying he's even going to make anything in the NFL, but when you just look at his size, decent speed, and then you're talking about a guy that jump out of the building, that's a guy that you might be able to work with, and you might be able to get a small type of strong career out of him.
We've talked a lot about receivers. In fact, we talked over a half hour about receivers alone. So coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, we'll come back and talk about offensive linemen in particular. That's coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk. Well, let's move to the offensive line. The Cardinals do have a need in particular. We feel they have a need at guard. It's not necessarily now with the addition of at kind of right guard. It feels like they have a good mix of guys to compete with Will Hernandez, whom they just signed. Josh Jones, Justin Murray's coming back from injury, but Justin Murray's going to be a free agent after this next year. Will Hernandez is on a one-year deal, and Justin Pugh over at left guard has 1 year left on his deal. And Josh Jones is expected to, in a year from now, be playing tackle. So, guard and tackle, especially when you look at the right side, are areas where you could go. And I know there's two names that in the first round are kind of the headliners in terms of the Cardinals. One would be Boston College Zion Johnson, and then you've got Kenyon Green over at Texas A&M. What can you tell us about those two guys, which you'd prefer, and which is the most likely to be on the board?
It'll be interesting because I think, remember, Kenyon Green was slotted to be a top 15 pick in this draft. They were talking about him being one of the best guard prospects in the last forever, and then he came out and he really he struggled this year. But and I really recommend, this isn't just to plug it, but I really do recommend the last episode of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. We had our offensive line expert Sully on. He named about, he gave us his top 5, and then he gave us 5 guys to know in the second round. Didn't mention Zion or Kenyon Green, so these are, it's easier to talk about it now. Green got put in a terrible spot by Texas A&M this year. If you go back, remember, he was a guy that everybody had in their top 15 for the 2022 NFL draft, and then the season happened, and now he's falling out of first rounds in the mock. A lot of that was his testing. He did not test well at all. Came in at, I believe, a little heavy, and that'll be something to watch. He came in, what did he come in at? 6'4", 323. So he came in about what? Okay, so that's what they were expecting. But he's got really long arms for guard. But the problem becomes, can he do anything else? And that's where you look at his season this year, and you look at it, and you're like, man, Texas A&M really screwed him, because they had him playing left tackle, they had him playing right tackle. I think he even took snaps at center, if I remember correctly. So it was just not really. Oh no, he played everywhere but center. So he took 400 snaps at left guard, 81 snaps at left tackle, 106 at right guard, and 142 at right tackle. And so a guy that had played about 1,400 snaps at right guard and left guard only was then asked to play, almost 400 snaps all over the line, and then 400 additional snaps. So his game regressed. Not shocking, right? The testing was a bit of a concern. He's a little over the 5-second short shuttle that we like to see from guards, which just means that he's not going to be a guy that can pull or do things like that. That being said, he's a guy that plays within mean streak, plays nasty, plays physical, and is a good drive blocker. You could see him being similar to like a Richie Incognito type of player in the NFL. Zion Johnson's a guy that I've just fallen in love with throughout the draft process. When you look at him, he came from Davidson, where he was, originally just a dominant D2, I believe, player, and then got the call up to Boston College and started there. Played extremely well in the ACC. Now the ACC is kind of like the Pac-12. Sometimes, that's not saying a whole lot, and that's, as ASU fans, you are aware of that. That's, sometimes an issue, but Johnson graded out really well, and then you look at his athletic testing, and he was freaky. Height-wise, he's short. 6'2" and 5'8" is short for a guard. 312 pounds, right about average, but he had a really good vertical jump at 32 inches. That's 89th percentile. Broad jump, he was in the 91st percentile. But then his 3-cone and his short shuttle were over 90. So one was 92, one was 94th percentile for offensive linemen. He just tests out like an elite guard. When you look at it from that perspective, you get a couple of interesting ones. You get Ali Marpet, who he wasn't the one that retired, right?
Crap.
He might be.
Wasn't he the one who's?
He's one of the really good guards from Tampa. I don't remember if he retired or if he's the one that signed in Cincinnati.
He did. He retired.
Okay, and then you get
Kappa signed with.
Yeah, okay, Alex Kappa. That's right. Alex Alley. I can never remember. and then the other guy you get's Wyatt Teller, who's a 2-time All-Pro or 2-time second-team All-Pro guard for Virginia, that came out of Virginia Tech. Now, he came out as a defensive lineman, transferred over, but, nonetheless, athletic profile and testing, that's who, Zion Johnson grades out with. The Marpet comp, I think, really from a stylistic and athletic standpoint makes sense. So if you could get him at 23, ideal. I just don't see it happening. I don't see Johnson in an NFL in desperate need to protect their franchises. I don't see a guy like Johnson getting there. Green could get there. I wouldn't take him. And I'm not, you guys know me, I'm not hard and fast on cutoff rules and things like that, but the 5+ second short shuttle really makes me nervous about his ability to move in the Cardinals.
Could he be Dorian Johnson like?
Yeah,
potentially.
He's obviously not that slow.
Right.
But that is actually what the red flag was for me, is that he tested similar in that aspect to Dorian Johnson. That to me is an issue and something that you wouldn't want to, address. The other guy that we've seen falling, and I've been making calls to a lot of people about this guy, is Tyler Linderbaum. And he's a center, and that's what the concern is. Measured in at 6'2", 296 pounds, T-Rex arms, 31.8-inch T-Rex arms. He's built like a old oak barrel. Like, that's basically what he's built like. Everybody compares him to Jason Kelsey, the all-pro center from Philadelphia. He has that potential. He is that good. The problem being, is he a guy that can play guard for 2 years or, a year or 2 years? You can't tell me that you're going to be comfortable moving on from Rodney Hudson to bring in Linderbaum and then, who's an undersized center at 23. It feels like that too many teams are completely out on him in the first round because he is a center only.
And I will point out that the Cardinals over the last year, and I think this is the Sean Kugler effect, have changed how they draft and approach centers. They want guys with size. They for years, like you went with a Mason Cole. They had the kid that I can't remember they traded. The kid out of Georgia they traded.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
I should know his name. He was there like a year ago, but and up to Evan Boehm. those are guys that were on the smaller side of the center size, and then this last year they decided to go monster. Rodney Hudson, Max Garcia. This, I believe they just changed their center profile to be a much larger man than Linderbaum is.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate because I mean I think he's a great fit, and I think he'd be the perfect kind of pivot guy in the middle. But it may not work out. So that's round one. People might ask, would you take a tackle? I don't know, man. Like I'll tell you this: I'm not big on Trevor Penning or Bernard Raymond. Both guys projected to go in the range of the Cardinals. So let's just play a fun little game and say that all the four wide receivers we talked about, not Treylon Burks, are gone, and then Zion Johnson's gone. But Penning and Raymond are there, and a team like Cincinnati or even like a team like Detroit may want to go get one of them. Would you move back? That could be an interesting option there.
Well, for me, it comes down to another player, and this we'll talk about the defensive side because there's a couple of two or three defensive guys that I have the feeling that the Cardinals will be super interested in. So
yeah, and so that's the thing. So I don't see tackle unless like a Charles Cross falls to them to 23, which I don't see happening. I don't see tackle being an option.
What about the kid out of Tulsa?
Tyler Smith's an interesting one. Again, if you listen to our podcast, Sully absolutely loves Tyler Smith. Sees him as a guy that's going to end up being a great tackle starter in the league. He's a guy that can probably come in and play guard year one. The issue you're going to have, and something that we have to always think about is is he going to be too big to play guard in front of Kyler Murray? Now he's only 6'5", so I don't think it'll be a huge issue because I think Hughes 6'4"-ish,
something like that. And I will say this: Max Garcia is not a small man himself.
Yeah, and so you look at it, but he tested out, similar to Kyle Long as well, and like a Taylor Moton. So you've got guys.
Max Garcia is 6'4", and they have him at right guard.
So I mean, is 1 inch going to make a difference? Probably not, right? Like, probably not going to be a big deal. Yeah. So so Tyler Smith's a guy that could fit there. I just, Jess and I talked about it before the show. Do you think that they're going to play a rookie over Kelvin Beachum?
Nope.
And so you have to be super confident that you're getting a guy in Smith that can play right guard year one and then balance out to tackle or left tackle if need be.
Going more day two, just throwing names out there. A name that came up, would there be any guards or tackles worth at 55? One that came up in my most recent mock draft simulation was Georgia's Jamari Salyer. Big dude, but is he on the lesser athletic side?
Yeah, Salyer's an interesting one. 6'3", came in at 321 pounds, did not test out. Kind of profile similar to like a Quentin Spain, where you're talking about just a big dude with good arm length at 33 5/8 of an inch at 6'3", and a strong guy. He looks like he does have athletic limitations, and that's the question. I don't think we have pro day numbers on him yet. I could be wrong. I'm just double checking real quick. But no, we don't have any pro day testing numbers, but he measures out like guys that we've seen that have been good, like a Ben Grubbs, or like a Stefan Wisniewski, those type of guys. So, he could be a guy that's not bad. Another name that gets brought up quite a bit, in the second round is Darian Kennard out of Kentucky. He's a guy that I want to make sure I get his numbers right, because some of these sites have not updated the numbers of size of guys. So those are important
6'5"
things.
5 3/8 is what the comp at the comp.
322 pounds. Dude has vines for arms.
35-inch arms.
Yeah, 35-inch arms, and his hand size is 11 1/4. So like, he's got massive hands. He's, he just barely made the short shuttle. He's under 5 seconds, but his three cone was over 8. So, those are concerning things. He is not a linear, a athlete in that sense. However, when you look at him, you've got some comps that come out not too bad, um, like a Mike Upati to like a Brandon Linder. So guys that have had good NFL careers. That's the type of guy that he plays like. I don't think he's as agile as Upati. So, but like when you're talking about a guy that gets downhill and wants to punish people, that's Kennard. And then like in round 3, so if they don't go round 2, round 1 or round 2, my favorite guy, one of my favorite prospects in the draft is actually Dylan Parham out of Memphis. Parham's a guy that everybody was super worried about his size coming in. They mentioned Linderbaum, but he was the other guy, dude. Like everybody was very worried about him coming in because he was listed at Memphis at 283 pounds.
Whoa.
So you're like, oh, okay. He measured in at 6'2" and 5'8" and 311 pounds. And then he still tested really, really well. So when you look at it from that perspective, especially in his jumps and his broad jump at 84, like that tells me that the hips are still explosive. His three cone and short shuttle time were good. He has, similar athletic profile to, a guy we mentioned a little earlier, Richie Incognito. He moves like a guy that we all know here, Jonathan Cooper. I know that scares people, but from a movement standpoint, that's something to think about. He plays similar to like an Andy Levitre type of guy who had a really good long career in the NFL. So, that's not a bad thing. And then of course you get your day 3 guys. And so there's some guys that are just, you have questions about. Now, what makes this really hard is that the Cardinals, we mentioned it earlier, don't have a 4th or 5th round pick.
But they do love 6th and 7th round linemen.
They really do. A couple guys, and I don't know. So, obviously I don't go incredibly deep into the O-line. Cole Strange from, I believe it's Chattanooga.
Yeah.
He's an interesting one. The kid out of Nebraska, Cam Jurgens, is very interesting to me. And then Zach Tom out of Wake Forest. Now, these are all interior guys, and that's really what I've been focusing on. So they're a little leaner than what you're used to. Like, for instance, Ed Ingram, 6'3", 307 pounds. So just a little leaner than what we normally see. But that's why they'll go in that region over going on day 1 or day 2, is because they just don't have the full package where they might have to gain weight or maybe a year to play. But you look at it, I do like Ingram quite a bit. Zach Tom from Wake Forest, which is, baffling to say, but he's a bigger guy, played center. I think he could be a valuable day 3 center that could potentially overtake Hudson. Now, he's a little leaner at 304, but he's 6'4", so he's got the frame to add about 10 to 15 pounds, and I don't think he'll lose any of that athleticism, and he tested really well. 40 is not a huge thing, but it's always impressive when a guy that's over 300 pounds goes sub 5, and he ran a 4.94 40. He tested he had a 33-inch vertical. He had a 118-inch broad jump, which is in the 98th percentile, but his 3 cone and short shuttle were elite, 95th and 92nd percentile respectively. So this dude moves. He moves, and he's built like Joel Bitonio, who I loved coming out of Nevada in 2014, a long time ago. Low end type of guy. You could see him, similar to like a David Quisenberry, right, who had a nice little career in the NFL, never was the guy. But so, like, if you can get him in round 6, I think that would be a fantastic get for the Cardinals, because he could be the center of the future.
Cut out next from the Rise FC Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk of the way. We'll move over to the running back position. Not really much to discuss in terms of round one. The Cardinals are good there, but let's talk about guys who could be targeted later on. That's coming next on Rise FC Red. We're back on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk of the web. We believe that running back will be off the table. From what I understood from your show, Breece Hall should get first round consideration, but do you think he's going to go there?
I could see the Bills pulling the trigger, right? Like if they feel like that's who they are away, I could see that. Hall is just an elite size skill prospect. 5'11", 217, 4'3", 940, 40-inch vert, 126-inch broad. So those numbers are all above the 90th percentile.
And they got the production to go with it.
Yeah, and then you have high end production. You look at it, we've talked about it, he kind of comps out on the scale of like Joseph Adai, who was a really good player for a couple of years for the Colts, to maybe slightly faster Matt Forte type, who was a dominant running back for 5 years, 6 years in the NFL. So if he's there at 55, is that a choice he would make? Here's the thing: if you take Breece Hall at 55, it's because you've graded him as a top 20 player and cannot fathom passing on him.
Right.
And so if you're that convicted by it, that's fine. I just don't see it happening. Kenneth Walker, the same thing, 5'9", 211, but he ran a 4.38. Honestly, when you watch him on film, like you see a guy that moves well, but I didn't see him as a sub 4.4 guy. And then you have the question about where was the production while you were at Wake Forest. Obviously, Michigan State to Wake Forest is a big thing, but you could see him being, similar to like a Felix Jones type, or like even like a Willie Parker, who if you remember back in the day with the Steelers, right? Like
he had a few solid productive years,
right? A guy that. Justin loves that. I love his ability, but I would never take him in the top 3 rounds, is Zamir White. 6 foot, 214 pounds. He ran a 4.40, and I think he's had 2 ACL injuries. He's had 2 ACL injuries already. So
which means he can't get it hurt again. He's got 2 new ACLs, right?
Right, exactly. So I'm completely out on him in terms of that. But like, if the Cardinals drafted him at say 87, I would understand it. Like, this dude can come in, probably get you 4 years of really, really strong play, and then you move on. I just, I wouldn't do it again. Not my cup of tea. An interesting guy that profiles kind of similar to James Conner. So if you're looking for just kind of a duplicate back, is like a Brian Robinson out of Alabama. He's a guy at 6'2", 225 pounds who, like, God forbid Connor gets hurt or misses a couple games like he did this year, you're not missing that big back, right? So like maybe you have a redundant guy on the roster instead of a guy that in Benjamin, who's kind of more of the wiggle Chase Edmonds replacement. That's just one of the guys, but I really like Brian Robinson. A guy that, man, I wanted to love, and he didn't do all the testing, so we'll never know. Isaiah Spiller out of Texas A&M.
I was just going to ask you about him. Like, he's like, there were like, but yeah, when his like, from what you guys talked about, it was like you wanted him to be athletic, and then the testing that he did showed that he was subpar.
Yeah, and so you got a guy that runs patiently, that has the size at 6 foot, 200, I think he's 217 pounds.
Yeah.
6 foot, 217. So you look at it from that way. I think he might be, and obviously this is like a super high end comp. So nobody, but like when you're looking at him, you're like, oh, could he be like Arian Foster? Because he's not a guy that tested well. Like just flat out, he didn't test well for a running back. And so that's the question that you have is like, are you willing to risk a pick on a guy that had a down year and then wasn't a super athletic guy? You could be looking at a similar your range of outcomes could be from like a Devontae Booker type who hasn't done anything in the league to, like I said, like an Arian Foster if he's just that good of a runner despite kind of lacking athleticism. And then you go to these like guys late, right? Because like we talked about, the Cardinals don't have a ton of picks in that middle round. So there's a couple guys that I think are 100% worth a look. Justin raved about him and already got Jess on board if that's the move they make. So that's the type of influence we can wield over there. But no, Ty Chandler out of North Carolina. I believe by way of Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, and if we remember a year ago that they had their two running backs that were just absolutely dynamic. North Carolina is doing quite the job with runners right now.
Right. And so you look at his like athletic testing profile, you get, he was a special athlete, 5'11", 205 pounds, ran a 4.38 40, which is just ridiculous. You look at it, you've got a guy that can play similar to like a Tevin Coleman type in terms of running the ball, but he's already really good at catching the ball out of the backfield. Super good. And catching the ball out of the backfield. And the funny thing is he's more of and that's why I compared him to Tevin Coleman. I don't know how many people watch Tevin Coleman, but like for being as athletic and speedy, he's not a guy that makes you miss, but more of kind of like a power guy that uses that speed where he runs through you. But man, he can catch the ball out of the backfield. And so like that was the first thing that like really stuck out to me because of that. Another guy that's not too bad, Tristan Ebner out of Baylor. Again, these Baylor dudes are freaks. 5'11", 206, ran a 4.43 40. They do a good job, but he truly is like a Swiss Army knife type of back. He might be a guy that you can like play like a Chase Edmonds type, and so you look at it, get him in round 6. It might be a nice fit for them. Athletically, he tested out similarly to like a Keyshawn Vaughn coming out of Vanderbilt a couple of years ago. And I think didn't the Bucks take him in the 3rd round, like something crazy like that? Yeah. So
a guy I kind of like at least in mocks it shows up, and I my simulations gone a couple of times. He's got size and speed. Is Florida International's Devontae Price, 6'1", 6'1.5", 210. But again, another sub 4.4 guy. So you've got size and top end speed. If you want to kind of look at, it's kind of, he built a lot like Kenyon Drake, right?
Right. Yeah. So like similar size to Drake, faster though, right? And so it's funny because that's what the first thing people say when they see Price is they're like, oh, this dude is a safety, right? Because that's what he looks like.
That's how he profiles.
Yeah. So, but you look at it, he's a guy that has had a lot of success running the ball and as a kick returner. So again, when you're looking, you're saying, hey, because we're talking about 6th and 7th round guys at this point. So, and then he's developed as a pass catcher in each of his, his 4 seasons at FIU. I think the big thing is he's from FIU, so like you got to be understanding of again, not a dominant player at a smaller school. I got another guy that was interesting to me that I wanted to see better numbers from, and so that's why I think he's going to end up going in the back like in the 6th or 7th round, but he's still interesting to me. Is the kid from BYU, Tyler?
I was gonna say that Tyler Algier. He is like he can give you a high end production, but I think at the worst you're probably looking at Stephon Taylor.
Right, type of back where he's hangs around for the 4 years and then falls off. But if you're getting that from your 6th round pick,
That's
that
fantastic. Well, and
that's awesome.
didn't he like he plays?
He,
Fans
yeah,
will love him.
right, and he's just a very physical type of guy, and so
Arizona State fans will remember what Algier did. It was after a turnover. It was Algier that came from running behind and knocked the football out, forcing a fumble after the fumble, and kind of ruined that game for the Sun Devils.
yeah. But yeah, so Algier is another guy. I think he falls because, I mean, again, it's really tough at 5'11", 225 to be a 4'6" guy and make teams be like, oh, I'm gonna take a shot on you. If he was a 4'4" guy, we're talking about him probably on day 2. So we'll see. We'll
But
see
he was everything about that offense, and when
he really was.
he was everything on that offense. Didn't he have like 25 touchdowns or something like that?
Yeah, he put up insane numbers this year. He had over 1,600 yards rushing, and then I think he had good numbers. Yeah, he had good numbers receiving
He
too, I
had
think.
28 catches. Yeah,
About
but yeah,
200 yards. Yeah.
he scored 23 touchdowns on the ground last year. Another 13. So he scored 36 touchdowns over the last 2 years. He had 1,800 yards from scrimmage last year, 1,300 the year before. When he had Zach Wilson, he was dynamic. Even without Zach Wilson, he became the workhorse.
Right. And so that's the thing is you look at him.
6.4 yards per carry in his career for BYU. And so
And again,
you'd like to see that.
It goes back to what we said. Like if you're looking for a guy that's more similar to James Conner, though you have some options this year. The last guy I'll throw out there, I don't think he's going to be available, but like if for whatever reason, like a Jerome Ford fell, he had a nice little career at Cincy, a guy that people didn't expect to be as good as he was after. I think he transferred from Bama, if I remember correctly. So he's a guy that, again, not going to be a burner, but a good running back, 5'11", 210, 4.46 40, but like a physical guy willing to kind of get in the mix there. This is a good running back class, man. Like it's a good draft to need one, and I think the Cardinals do need one. There's other guys that there's so many running backs.
Well, we didn't even talk about Rachaad White, but we think he's probably going to be early day 3, which means the Cardinals are out of the picture.
Right, and I've said I think he can be one of the guys in this draft because you look at White, 6 foot, 215 pounds, 4.48, but his jumps were insane.
He can catch the ball.
He
looks good. He can be a workhorse.
Right, and so you look at it. Last season in 2020, he had 420 rushing yards in 4 games and 151 receiving yards in 4 games. This year was a little more, difficult. And so, but he's a guy. He had, he had over 1,000 yards rushing and over 400 yards receiving still. So like almost, I think he had about 1,500 combined, or just under 1,500 total yards from scrimmage. In only 11 games. Like this is a dude that is big, physical. Again, like when you look at him, you're like, oh, he could potentially, go in and be the James Conner role. And that's when we talked about when they signed Conner, that his skill set's more difficult to replace, but there are some options this year. The question is going to be, do you want to take a running back at 87 to replace that? If not, then those guys that we talked about, the Ty Chandlers, the Treston Ebners, those guys are, the Devontae Prices, these burner backs out of the backfield. Those are the guys to know.
Coming next on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's move on and talk a little bit about the tight ends that are worth taking a look at. That's coming next on Rise FC Red. We're back on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals have signed 3 veteran tight ends. There probably is not a first-round tight end, and I doubt the Cardinals will even go tight end in round 2. However, there are some interesting prospects on the rest of the way. Interesting names. You've got some specialized guys. I know you're a fan of Jeremy Ruckert. Do you think the Cardinals, I know he would fit because he kind of fits the role of a tight end. And I wouldn't rule out even a third-round tight end, even though they've added Ertz and Max Williams and also Steven Anderson, and in part because Max Williams, the way his contract is structured, none of it's guaranteed. He didn't get a signing bonus. He'll get a roster bonus if he makes the team. He'll make a roster bonus if he's active in week 1, and then he gets roster bonuses for being active. So it appears that they have at least some concern about his health.
Yeah, and as they should. And so you bring up Max Williams, and so then you go, okay, who are the guys that could do what Max Williams does? Trey McBride's obviously the top guy. I still don't think he does enough in the run game to be a complete dominant tight end. I think he's still more of a pass catching guy, but he does have the play strength to be a guy that is a good two-way tight end. That being said, I think he's going to go around that 55 range. I don't know if you could take a tight end at 55.
No.
You mentioned Jeremy Ruckert. He profiles similar to Max Williams, right? So when you're looking at a guy that could fit what they want to do in the Max Williams role, Ruckert's the guy. He'd probably be around at 87. Again, ideally you might get him in the 4th round, but they don't have that option.
Yeah,
so,
I know they like Kate Otten out of Washington. I think there's another guy that they've looked at as well. Is it Cole Strange, or is he a lineman?
He's a lineman. Yeah, Strange is the
Cole
center.
Turner.
Cole Turner. Okay. Yeah, Cole Strange is the lineman that we talked about a little earlier. Cole Turner's from Nevada. Yeah. Otten's an interesting one because there are some people that said he's the best tight end in the class. So that's the interesting thing is I think, again, you're talking about a guy at 55. Are you going to want to take him at 55? It'll be interesting because I don't know, a Cole Turner is a guy that's being projected on day 3, so he might fit a little bit more. And he's a good blocker. Another one that is interesting to me is the kid out of Virginia by way of Oklahoma State, Jelani Woods. You want to talk about a guy that has just completely nailed the offseason, 6'7", 260, but ran a 4.640. And then he was a blocker only in terms of while at Oklahoma State, and then went to Virginia and put up 44 catches for 598 yards and 8 touchdowns. So quadrupled his career numbers. And man, he likes to get physical and he'd be, again, a guy I don't see him making it to round 6, but he would be the ideal kind of round 6 guy for what the Cardinals want in a tight end. And then I'll throw out one more name just because, I think he fits. It'd be a Charlie Kohler out of Iowa State. A little bit of a disappointing year from Kohler, but that Iowa State team really disappointed, I think, everybody all season. If you end up with that extra fourth round pick and you can't get Ruckert, I think Kohler would be a nice option instead.
The Cardinals are set to have, it looks like, a top 30 visit with Isaiah Likely.
That's an interesting one, man, because he profiles out more of as like a big slot receiver, kind of in the mold of. Oh no, I'm thinking of their other guy, Hiley and Likely. My bad. Yeah, he profiles out more to like the Delaney Walker type, right? Like so, like an H back almost. I wonder if they see him as a guy that can eventually develop into a blocker, but he's not a guy that's been asked to block a ton right now. And so when you look at it, he's a guy that's like a seam route H back. I think he would be more of the Zach Ertz type of replacement guy. And again, if you're looking at that and you're saying, hey, like if something happens to Ertz, we need a guy in there. I'm trying to look like Likely. I mean, is he? Again, I don't see any way you can justify taking him at 87 with what you need. But if he blocked better, like if you can convince me he can block better, I'm more comfortable with it. But like the only tight ends I would even like tight end are Ruckert and Otten at 87. Obviously McBride, but I don't think he'll be there. So
and you know my take on when it comes to 6th and 7th rounders. Does it really matter?
Right. Throw it at the wall, see if it sticks. If you get a guy that ends up hitting, that's awesome. So yeah, I mean, this is a good tight end class, but I think with everything they've done, it would be super redundant to pull the trigger on one.
Yeah. Coming on next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Best Hour of Cardinals Talking. We will wrap this show up talking about the position that the Cardinals will not address in the draft, but let's talk about the quarterbacks that there are and how that could affect, in particular, how the direction the Cardinals can go in those first 2 rounds. That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the web. All that's left to discuss is the quarterback position. And it's not about the Cardinals. We know that something has gone very, 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 very wrong if the Cardinals are looking at quarterbacks, because it seems like they are not interested in drafting quarterbacks these days. Even in the late rounds let's think the number of late round picks that they've had on quarterbacks. You've got Ryan Lindley, you've got Logan Thomas, but they've done it over the years, and they're content with. It seems like the last couple of years is to get them from elsewhere, because they had Chris Strevler, they brought from the Canadian League, they brought over Trace McSorley from Baltimore. That they're kind of interested in seeing guys who fit something, but who they've already seen, perhaps. That said, the quarterback class is going to be interesting. Do you think there will be more quarterbacks taken in the first round than 2? Or if we're going to see Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett, and where do you think those guys go?
Yeah, I do think we end up seeing 2. I think it's the 2 you mentioned. I think Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett. Man, this is why when you look at it from the Cardinals' perspective, right? Like if we take this as a Cardinals-centric look at the quarterbacks and you say,
please pick quarterbacks.
Right. like please take quarterbacks, push down, an Olave, push down a Jameson Williams, push down a George Karlaftis, push down a guy like Sauce Gardner or something like that. But like instead you're going to end up with just these 2 guys likely going. And
do you think Desmond Ridder has a chance to sneak into the first round?
Yeah, I think Ridder does because of his, standing. You're talking about a 4-year starter who won a ton of games. He tested out of this world. I've said, we've said on the podcast that he's kind of on that Marcus Mariota to like Colin Kaepernick type of scale when you're talking about athleticism, ability to throw the ball. Mariota ended up not being the guy that panned out in the NFL, but he's got really he was drafted very highly, and then you look at Ritter and you're like, okay, if he ends up like Mariota, you're talking about a guy that maybe starts, gives you 3 to 4 seasons as a starter and ends up being a really good backup in the league. I could see him getting picked. I like Matt Corral, but I can't justify anybody taking him early. You're talking about a undersized guy, 6'2", 212, who tries to play too physical, who tries to do too much with his frame. People harp on Kyler Murray and be like, oh, he avoids contact, oh, he's soft, oh, he's this or that. Well, a lot of it is protecting yourself to make sure you're available. And so when you look at it from that perspective, that's been one of the biggest flaws of Corral's game, is that he is a guy that plays like he's Cam Newton or like a Tim Tebow size, right? And it just doesn't work out. But a team could fall in love with him because he is a guy that has that kind of Baker Mayfield infectiousness to his style. But yeah, I think Pickett ends up. I think Malik Willis is the best quarterback in this class, and I think Kenny Pickett ends up being the first quarterback selected, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. I know I've seen from a couple of people, Carson Strong. How good is he? Because I've seen some legit. And these are people I know and respect from who have been on my network. Say he's the best quarterback in this class. Like he might be the sneaky good one. I don't know. I mean, coming out of Nevada, what is there to him?
I mean, you're talking at the best case scenario, like old Carson Palmer, right? The one that couldn't move, like 2016 Carson Palmer, 2017 Carson Palmer that couldn't move, couldn't get out of the pocket, and he's only, I think, 24. He's already had a couple of knee surgeries, I believe, so that's going to be a huge thing. He is a big body, big arm guy. The guy he reminds me of coming out more than anybody is Andrew Walter. You'll remember him.
Oh, yes, I do. Big armed, immobile guy.
Yeah,
wow.
That's kind of what he reminds me of.
Perfect for the early 90s.
Yeah, and so that's the thing is like, and you hear people say it like he moves around like an old Phillip Rivers or like an old Ben Roethlisberger. Like when you're talking about a quarterback in today's NFL where they have to be able to manipulate the pocket with ease, I just don't see it with him. A couple other guys, I've heard, the Cardinals have met with E.J. Perry, I believe, from Princeton or one of those fancy schools, right? Super athlete, 6'2", 211, 4.65 40, good broad jump, really good 3-cone and short shuttle time. Makes you wonder if they think like they could take him in the 7th round and stash him on a practice squad for a year or two, because he could end up being a guy that comes in to take over as the primary backup. We've seen how important the backup quarterback is. And again, like Jess said, 6th and 7th round picks, like throw something at the wall and see if something sticks. So he's an interesting one. There's just, this is why when people talk about trading Kyler Murray, Jess and I scratch our head because like, would you want to be picking a quarterback in this class?
Nope.
And so, you look at it, I mean, maybe one of these guys comes out and hits, but man, I don't see any of these guys being even close to as good as Kyler Murray, if not, and definitely not better. So when you look at it from that perspective, like, unless you're just going to load up on picks and go in for like a CJ Stroud next year, who's going to be the first pick in the draft, then you better have your answers at quarterback, because this is more often what the quarterback classes end up being like than guys that are coming out as the guys.
Absolutely. So with that, let's wrap up this edition of the Rise of Sea-Red podcast, episode 352. We will be back in a week talking about the defensive prospects. On behalf of the Rise of Sea-Red podcast, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always. You can catch us everywhere. You can get podcasts, read Revenge of the Birds, read Cards Wire, listen to Seth's Original Draft Breakdown podcast, and become a patron as well so you can get those bonus episodes. We'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.